So good morning and welcome to Voices for Virginia's Children's Second Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week, affiliated with the Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia campaign. My name is Megan and I have the privilege of serving as the operations manager here at Voices and also have the honor of welcoming you here today. The mission of Voices is to champion public policies that improve the lives of Virginia's children. In direct response to the impact on children and families of the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and racism as a public health crisis, Virginia's Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week was founded in 2020. The precursor of Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia was the Campaign for a Trauma-Informed Virginia. Trauma-informed care and resilience acknowledge the disparate impact of trauma on communities of color. When trauma is experienced collectively by communities, whether geographically, culturally, racially, or ethnically, we identify this as a systemic issue. Therefore, as champions of public policies, Voices recognizes that the systems that perpetuate trauma and long-term inequities and disparities must be dismantled. Through the Racial Truth and Reconciliation campaign, we accomplish two things. First, we engage communities in championing their own solutions authentically in recognition that truth-telling promotes healing and reconciliation. Secondly, we collaboratively identify solutions to address the root causes of inequities. Ultimately, through the campaign, we champion trauma and equity-informed policies to ensure a healthy and just future for children, youth, and families throughout Virginia. This week, you will have the opportunity to access and actively participate in a variety of offerings across 4 areas: diversity, equity, and inclusion, community-centered engagement, advocacy and activism, and policy, equity, and data analysis. We hope you will avail yourself to this opportunity and visit as many of the workshops as spark your interest. I will also drop in the chat at the end of this event where you can see events that you may have missed earlier in the week. For now, on behalf of Voices, I welcome you to Virginia's second Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week, August 22nd through 28th. This morning's presentation will be led by Cynthia Coleman and Nakia Johnson. Cynthia Coleman is the Chief Philanthropy Officer here at Voices for Virginia's Children. She is responsible for setting and strategically executing the organization's development plan, raising the profile of Voices, and building relationships with new and current donors, partners, and funders. Cynthia was most recently Director of Community Investments at United Way of Greater Richmond and Petersburg, where she managed the grant process and the group of dedicated volunteers who support that process as part of the Community Building Committee. She also served as co-chair of the newly formed committee addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, both internally and with CVC volunteers. Cynthia began her work at United Way in resource development, leading fundraising effort at its top-tier corporate workplace campaigns. Cynthia holds a Bachelor of Arts in American government, from the University of Virginia and a law degree from the T.C. Williams School of Law at the University of Richmond. Welcome, Cynthia. Nakia joined Legal Aid Justice Center in October 2020. Prior to LAJC, she was development manager at Voices for Virginia's Children. In that role, she was responsible for managing and assisting with the implementation of all development activities, including leading fundraising events and database management, as well as operational management. Nakia's career has been centered on nonprofit management and development, relationship building, and empowering marginalized communities through equity-based initiatives. Nakia is very involved in many community organizations and mentorship groups. She currently serves on the BAFRI board and programs committee, Art 180's programming committee, and is in the 2021 cohort of AFP Central Virginia's Inclusive Fundraising Fellowship. Nakia graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University with a bachelor's in sociology. I want to welcome you. Thank you for joining us, Nakia. It's good to have you back here with us at Voices, and we're really just looking forward to the discussion today. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Cynthia.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you having you here and supporting our second Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week. It is so nice to see some names of people I know, so thank you for your support. We're going to get started here, but we need you to help us get started. Please drop in the chat what community-centric fundraising means to you, and that ultimately may lead to some questions that we can answer towards the end of this presentation. But take a couple of minutes and tell us what it means. Thank you, Lauren. Anyone else? What community-centric fundraising means to you? I'm going to pull up our presentation while you all are still typing it in. Here we go. Rachel, I like listening. That's important. When members of the community guide the goals and we center them as respect. Yes, Veronica. Centering fundraising efforts around community building, addressing white supremacy and power structures that show up in traditional philanthropy and fundraising. Absolutely, Megan, absolutely. It's fundraising informed by the community you're serving. Absolutely. Involvement of community members in planning and development, community input directing the priorities for funding, all of those things, all of those things. So let me share my screen so we can get started here. All right. So thank you for some of your input. We're going to discuss all aspects of your answers today. As Megan mentioned during Nakia's intro, she worked at Voices prior to joining Legal Aid Justice Center, which I'll refer to as LAJC moving forward. Megan also mentioned that Nakia serves on the VAFRI, or Virginia Association of Fundraising Executives Board, and their programs committee. A few months ago, she organized and led a very powerful discussion for VAFRI around community-centric giving. It was the first discussion of its kind at VAFRI. Her colleagues at LAJC shared information on their journey from traditional fundraising to community-centric fundraising, which she is going to discuss this morning, along with her experience there now as their Senior Development Officer. And of course, we're going to leave time for you to share your thoughts and ask any questions. All right, so let's get started. During RTR Week, we have taken the opportunity to look at various aspects of how nonprofits, coalitions, and other organizations across the state working with, for, and in communities of color support racial healing and reconciliation. We've also seen the value of members of communities in need sharing their truths and being heard. The question is, what does nonprofit development do to support the work of healing, reconciliation, and justice? And so that's where community fundraising comes in. So what is it? We're going to help kind of ground our discussion. I'm going to provide some of this background information for whom this is new information. Community-centric fundraising is a fundraising model that is grounded in equity and social justice. It prioritizes the entire community over individual organizations. It fosters a sense of belonging and interdependence. It presents our work not as individual transactions, but holistically, and encourages mutual support between nonprofit. So the question is, Nakia, why now community-centric fundraising versus traditional fundraising?
Yeah, so I think that honestly, right now, it's just being amplified, especially after the events of 2020. I think community-centric fundraising has really come to the forefront. There are many groups that have been doing this work for years, all right? And it might not have had this term community-centric fundraising, but they've been doing that work of equity-based fundraising. So the community-centric fundraising movements, which you have sourced here, they were actually formed in 2018. They became a global movement in 2019. And yesterday, we actually just celebrated the 1 year of their launch of their website and their hub. So they have been doing that work for a little bit. And again, the movement has just been getting a little bit more traction since last summer. Some other organizations that have been doing this work way before, probably starting in the 2000s and some even in the 90s, Grassroots Institute for Fundraising Training, and they have a grassroots journal, and they have been doing a lot of articles and a lot of work on fundraising and equity. Black Philanthropy Month, which is this month, and I'm not sure if y'all have heard of it, but they have been around for, I think this is their 50th anniversary, their 50 year. So they've been around a long time as well. And again, just I think getting a lot more publicity right now. And then Philanthropic Initiative for Racial Equity has also been doing this work for a very long time. So again, I just think that right now it's being highlighted because everyone is looking at DEI initiatives, especially since last summer.
So let's address the elephant in the room. What about the people who oppose this type of fundraising? Those who say this is you turning away from your high net worth traditional majority donors.
You know, I do get that a lot, and not sometimes in one-on-one conversations, but in the bigger picture, there is a lot of pushback to community-centric fundraising, and I always tell people to examine why. Like, why are you pushing back on centering communities and grounding, your work in equity and social justice? Another argument that I hear a lot is about donor-centered fundraising and how that's working, and we already have that information that we need. But community-centric fundraising is not the opposite of donor-centered fundraising. Okay, it's a supplement, right? There are a lot of things in donor-centered fundraising that we should still be doing, right? We should be reaching out to our donors in a timely manner. We should be sending them communications and keeping them updated on our work. But we also need to be doing that in a way that prioritizes our community, that reduces harm in the community, and that furthers social justice. And then, on the point of that, it's going to turn away high donors. And I'll give some more of an example of that, later on in our conversation. But I think that's also okay, right? We really need to think about our organizations and our missions for our organizations. And if keeping, that high worth donor is going to really harm your communities, right? And having those conversations with donors is okay. And it's okay to kind of stand in your truth as an organization. And I think we don't give donors a lot of credit. Sometimes they want to have those conversations and they need to have those conversations. If we're treating them as true partners in our organization, then they'll understand the complexities of our work and why we're doing this work.
Thank you. So the takeaway here, the biggest takeaway is community-centric fundraising is not the opposite of traditional fundraising. And so thank you for that piece.
Yeah.
So what does it mean for development? Well, a few things. Participation in this model means building people power through philanthropy and advocacy. That's what Nakia was just talking about. It's centered around community and empowering community voices, specifically children and families, which is the work we do at Voices. It's an opportunity to break down barriers that maintain privilege as at the center of philanthropy. It centers equity. I saw that in the chat that it focuses on equity. It also builds strong, respectful, and long-term relationships with all donors, which we should be doing anyway. So I have to share some data. My former colleague, Michael Mallet, is on here from United Way. He would be very proud of me. Just want you all to see and have some information about giving across the country. In 2019, Americans gave $449 billion. 69% of those funds are from individual donors, which equals an average of $309.66 per donor. Corporations donated $21 billion. Foundations gave a whopping $75 billion, and approximately 90% of high net worth households gave to charity. The positive thing was that there were increases in all areas over 2018. This information came from the National Philanthropic Trust. There's lots of great general information if you're looking for some there on their website, and they source it from a number of other websites that can help you in finding the information that you need. So we're going to go from bigger data to smaller data. So here's some more interesting data from Giving Black Greater Richmond, the legacy of Black ingenuity and collective power. In January of this year, Giving Black Greater Richmond, the legacy of Black ingenuity and collective power was published by a collaboration between the New England Blacks in Philanthropy and Richmond's Sister Fund, Ujima Legacy Fund, and the Community Foundation for Greater Richmond. It highlights the strong history of giving in Richmond. As stated in the report, which is a treasure trove of information, this report is, quote, a framework that offers a pathway for an intentional Black giving strategy. So when we talk about recognizing all donors, I thought it was useful to share information from this report on Black giving in Richmond. So the most important and overlooked societal issues for Black donors in Richmond were the three same issues: economic equity, educational equity, and health equity. And this was at from under $40,000 all the way to $250,000 plus in income. Do you volunteer your time? A yes. 91% of Black donors in Richmond who responded volunteer their time. And a little more interesting data. In the past 12 months, how much did you give philanthropically? Well, 1/4 of Black donors reported donations were at least $5,000 or above. And you can see here the percentages of giving. So 45% of Black donors were giving at least $1 to $1,000. And so this ties back to the idea of community-centric fundraising when we talk about time, talent, and treasure. So it's not just focused on the money and high net worth. It's focused on people who are also giving in their community of their time, who are sharing their talent to volunteer on different boards and help them get to where they need. And then of course, it's also sharing their treasure. So I just want to share that information to give you some idea of how it's looking in the Black community in Richmond. And keep dropping your questions in the chat as we go through if you have any. So in the development of the community-centric fundraising model, ccf.org identified 10 principles by which this work should be approached. Fundraising should be grounded in race, equity, and social justice. Individual organizational missions are not as important as the collective community. Nonprofits are generous with and mutually supportive of one another. We all need to play in the sandbox well. All who engage in strengthening the community are equally valued, whether volunteer staff, donor, or board member. Time is valued equally as money. Again, time, talent, treasure. We treat donors as partners, and this means that we are transparent and we occasionally have difficult conversations. We foster a sense of belonging, not othering. We promote the understanding that everyone personally benefits from engaging in the work of social justice. It's not just charity and compassion. And we see the work of social justice, as I said earlier, as holistic and transformative, not transactional. So not just give me your money. It's much deeper than that. And we recognize that healing and liberation requires a commitment to economic justice, which was identified as an important and often overlooked societal issue by Black donors in Richmond. So here's the good part. We're going to talk with Nakia. And I have to say, I'm so proud of myself in finding this graphic, because if you notice, the young lady in orange kind of has my hairdo. And then if you notice, a young lady in blue has a beautiful natural like Nakia, but I just had to add that. So thank you. So Nakia, can you please explain how LAJC approached their shift to community-centric fundraising? There was a great deal of planning that went into this process, correct?
Yeah, so as you all heard, I used to work at Voices, so I've been at LAJC just a little bit under a year now, but the strategic planning process, we underwent a strategic plan process that was completed about 3 years ago. And the process itself actually took about 18 months to complete, because they really wanted to make sure that we were listening to the community, we were listening to stakeholders, and we were listening to the staff. If you all are not too familiar with Legal Aid Justice Center, currently we have about, I don't even know what the exact count is, but it's over 60 employees spread out throughout the state. We have 4 offices currently. So again, that strategic plan process really took a great deal of planning and intentionality to complete. But one of the core questions that was tackled was, are we in a racial justice organization, right? The organization has always been traditionally anti-poverty, but we were trying to struggle with, are we really racial justice? And do we want to make that explicit in our core principles, which we ended up doing in that strategic plan. And so 3 years ago, we were very much more intentional and very explicit about what our mission was. And so our mission is that we partner with communities and clients to achieve justice by dismantling systems that create and perpetuate poverty. And I really like this, this explanation that our executive director, Angela Cholfi, gave at the BAFRI talk, which is, we are a cross between your neighborhood legal aid and your dragon fighting racial justice organization. I think that really kind of ties it up. So yeah, there was a lot of planning that went into that process to make sure that we, again, did that intentionally.
Good. So I understand part of the process was looking at the composition of your board. So you started at the top first.
Yeah. So yeah, we started at the top, and I think it's really important also to note that the work of community-centric fundraising can't be done without an organization who's very explicit with racial justice and equity goals. So again, we kind of started at the top, right? And so with our board, currently, we are over 50% self-identified people of color on our board. We also have about 24% that are community members, and then about 24% members that are eligible for our services as a legal aid. So again, we're really intentional about making sure that community members are at the table, and that people that are getting our services are also at the table, right? To make sure that they're helping to inform our strategy and how we are showing up in their communities.
So how was it getting their buy-in?
Honestly, I think, once we did that strategic plan and kind of cemented what our mission was, and again, our principles for equity, for racial justice, for, having these services for low-income communities, it was really easy to get their buy-in, right? Because they were already educated about why it was important. And so then just tying that to fundraising and making sure that we were doing that throughout all different threads of our work was much easier to do, because the community-centric fundraising principles really did tie in very naturally with the organization's mission and our values. So it was pretty easy to get their buy-in once they understood. But we're also doing a lot of training, not just with the staff, but with our board as well. So a couple of our board members also attended that BAFRI luncheon that we did. Whenever there are presentations or any type of materials, we send that information to them as well, so that they're constantly getting that information that we're getting as well.
Digressing a bit, what was the feedback that you received from that BAFRI presentation? Because that was a big deal.
Yeah, it was. And like you said, it was kind of the first of its kind in BAFRI history, as far as we know. And the feedback was it was overwhelmingly positive, which I was grateful for. I think, as with anyone that is tackling community-centric fundraising in their organizations as a whole, there is some, like we talked about, there could be some pushback, right? About why are we moving to this model? What's different? What's not working about donor-centric fundraising? But I think that because we structured it kind of as this is what it is, and we also had organizations talk about their journey with community-centric fundraising and really answered some of those questions that you asked earlier, right? Of like, why now? How does this work? Are we losing donors? And both of those organizations didn't lose donors, right? They actually, fundraising has been good for them. And so again, I think the feedback was really positive, because they got some concrete answers to the questions that they had about implementing a more community-centered fundraising goal.
I remember being on the call, and there was a lot of discussion around your CEO sharing information about creating an anti-racist gift acceptance policy. Can you talk some more about that?
Yeah, and I think this is another example of, having board buy-in, because this gift acceptance policy, we drafted it as a development team, but it did have to go to, our development committee and our board for approval. And I am really proud of this gift acceptance policy. Again, it's anti-racist. Right at the forefront in the beginning, we really talk about our goal, our mission, our values as again, racial justice and an equity organization, anti-poverty organization. So we talk about that up front, right? About how we can't really separate, we can't be a racial justice organization and an equity organization and separate that wealth is a racial justice issue as well, right? And poverty is a racist issue as well. And so we talk about that in the gift acceptance policy. And it's really the conditions under which we will accept gifts. And so we try and make that explicit too, that we're not trying to be, a holier than thou. We're not going to accept your money because it's tainted, because let's be honest, all money is tainted. And so it's really what conditions we'll accept it under. And so the gift acceptance policy really allows us to turn down gifts that will do harm to our work, to our communities, that will undermine our community's work. And so one thing that I know I also got a lot of positive feedback on was our organization was able to turn down about $700,000 in corporate donations because of this gift acceptance policy, right? And again, because we were explicit with, we don't want to take money that's going to undermine our communities and that's going to harm our ability to do our work. So again, it was a bit easy to put this into fruition because again, we had that education within our team, with our staff, and with our board members. Another thing that it really centers in our gift acceptance policy too is making the case for unrestricted giving.
Yes.
And so I'm not sure how many fundraisers are on the call right now, but there are gifts that you can give that just go to your mission, that go to your core mission and support your organization as a whole. And sometimes, specifically, it happens mostly with grants, sometimes with donors. They'll want to give to a specific program, or they'll want to tie it to a specific thing that you're doing, right? And so our gift acceptance policy also makes a case for unrestricted giving. And I think, again, to be able to do community-centric fundraising and to really keep the community at the forefront in an ethical way, we have to be accountable to our communities and not to the donors and to the funders. And so being able to have unrestricted giving is not just about the flexibility to spend the money, but also to be accountable to our communities with how we spend the money and what solutions that we are funding.
Absolutely. So, can you tell us now something about your current role and how this is all working now that you have joined LAJC?
Yeah, so as Megan said in the beginning, I'm a senior development officer at Legal Aid Justice Center in the Richmond office. So basically I do anything that has to do with relational fundraising. I'm in charge of in the Richmond area, and we work as a team. Our development team, we have about 6 people currently. And so I will be honest, I think the fact that we had cemented our values in our strategic plan process 3 years ago has been helpful for me coming on board because it's been much more authentic when I talk with donors, when I'm doing fundraising, when I'm having these conversations, because they already understand. It's not like I'm explaining to them why we're doing this work. Most of them have already been donors for a long time. And so they understand the change. They understand the why. They understand why we are, really taking our cues from the community, which has been so much easier for me in having, those conversations again. They're already educated. So yeah, it's much more helpful. Another thing too is that we, again, with talking about unrestricted giving, we really, especially since I've come on board, we haven't designed campaigns around specific programming. So all of our asks, whether it is our annual appeal, our email blast for support, they have been for unrestricted giving. And so we are also trying to cultivate that idea and really, again, educate our donors in that we're doing this work, right? We have 4 core programs in our organization, and they all equally, we need funding for all of that. And again, we need to make sure that we're taking our cues from the community. And so our ask to our donors is unrestricted. And again, since they've already had that education, it's so much easier to do. And it's just been a lot more authentic for me to have those conversations, as a woman of color.
Yes.
And I've shared this before in other forums, but I've been in fundraising for about, since 2018 formally, a little bit longer informally, but it was always interesting to me as a woman of color how we fundraised when we talk about donor-centric fundraising, right? And the donor is always right, and if they want to put their money towards this one thing, we're going to bend our work to accommodate that. And that always felt wrong to me. I, again, woman of color, and I've always been doing a lot of community work too. So it was interesting, that dissonance of like having to do the work in a certain way, but also understanding why donors weren't resonating with that. And so again, it's been great to, have an organization that kind of went through that process already. And so it's much more easier for me to have those conversations.
And that's a plug for representation. So the two of us there aren't a lot of us who get to do what we do here in the Richmond area. And so when we talk about representation in terms of the board, but it also has to be representation in terms of your staff, specifically staff related to philanthropy. So thank you for that. Now, is there anything that I missed before we start taking? Before we start taking questions. Okay, Megan, go.
Can I, there's a few in the chat for you. So what qualifies as a gift that would cause harm in the policy you spoke about, Nakia?
That's a good question.
That is a good question. So again, we are, so when I say that, we partner with communities and clients in our mission, right, to dismantle systems of poverty. Again, we are a legal aid, but we're also a anti-racist and racial justice organization. And so I guess an example would be, again, we sometimes do class action suits, and I'm not sure if you all have seen the news, but currently we're working, we sued the Virginia Employment Commission about unemployment insurance and making sure that people get their benefits. So this is a hypothetical, right? But if the VEC was like, we want to give you all funding, that would be a clear conflict of interest, first of all, but that would also cause harm not only to our communities, but for us to do our work, because that is, again, a clear conflict, right? Of, oh, are they taking this money as, maybe hush money? Are they taking this money as, a way to do a backhand deal with, the organization that, again, will undermine the work of getting our communities their unemployment insurance? So I think that's a pretty clear example of, when it would cause harm. And what that means to your organization might be different because, again, we work with a lot of communities, we work with a lot of partner organizations. And so we really, sometimes when we get funding and we have specific, maybe grants, not deadlines, but, specific grant things that we need to check off, sometimes we'll go to those organizations and ask them, like, is this doable? Do you feel like this is going to cause harm for you to be able to then go back to that organization and maybe, go on strike for, workers' rights or do whatever that you need to do to further your mission? So it looks different in different cases, but again, we take our cues from the community. And if it's something that community says, this doesn't seem doable to us, we'll go back to the funder. And so we don't typically, we never just say, no, we're not going to take the money. It has always been a conversation with those funders or with those donors of why, right? And now that we have the gift acceptance policy, we can also show them to that policy for them to understand a little bit. But all of the money that we, said no to, it led to great conversations with those donors, with those funders. And so it wasn't a one-off thing of like, they felt a type of way because we were saying no to their money, but a lot of them understood the why. And the great thing too is that money, like the $700,000 that I talked about earlier, all that money went to other organizations that are either in the racial justice or legal aid community. So it didn't, just because we didn't take it, other organizations within our circle were able to benefit from that funding themselves.
That's great. I appreciate you sharing. There's one other question on if it would be possible to share that policy out.
Yeah. I had a feeling someone was going to ask that, so I actually pulled it up the website just so I can drop it easy for you all.
That's great. Thank you so much.
And so before, I know, Cynthia, you were about to go into another question, but I also just wanted to point out your what you were talking about, representation within the field. And so I like sharing this story a lot too, because I think for me, again, being a little bit newer in the development field for me, especially when I started out, I definitely was looking for mentorship, right? Of how do I do this work and how do I do it the right way? And, I joined a lot of organizations in Richmond and Virginia. And I also noticed the same thing, that there weren't a lot of people of color or women of color within the field. But the interesting thing is after I did some digging, so I want to say maybe last year, doing a little bit more work and joining organizations that were focused on people of color, I actually found there are a lot, and I won't say like an abundance, but there are a lot of people of color that are fundraising, especially within the Richmond and Virginia area. It's just that a lot of them are not in these organizations because they also don't like the way that the fundraising is being taught. So that was one thing that I noticed too, is that some people are just opting out of even participating in these organizations because they don't feel a connection with the way that things are being done or the way that they should be doing things. So I find that interesting too, that, there are people in the field and they're just not being seen or not being, not being rewarded for the work that they're doing because it's different than what the mainstream is doing.
Now, my last question was just, did I miss anything that you wanted everyone to hear today? That was it.
Yeah, so I think two other things that I really wanted to highlight, or maybe three things, but one thing, we talked about, again, this argument that we're going to be turning away our high worth donors. So for LHAC, again, I think it's actually been good for us to stand in our values and to be really authentic with who we are. And so our budget has actually grown more than 50% in the last 3 years. And so again, if you remember what I said earlier, we did our strategic plan about 3 years ago. So since being more explicit in our values, we've actually been able to grow our budget, been able to grow our giving. And so, I know this might not be, overall for everyone, right? We have a pretty large budget. However, again, it's been good for us to be authentic and to have those conversations with donors. And I think for me, coming onto Legal Aid Justice Center, having conversations with donors authentically has actually led to bigger gifts from some of the donors that have been in the database for years. And so again, I think being authentic and having those conversations with donors, they're actually craving that and they appreciate that. Another thing that I wanted to talk about too, earlier, we talked a little bit about our partner organizations and how we sometimes will send funding to them. I think that's another part for us of being community-centered and really being community-directed. We partner with a lot of grassroots organizations and BIPOC-led organizations. And so we really do offer support to them too. And so sometimes that's support in applying for a funding on their own, whether that's an introduction to a funder or a donor, like in the example that I shared earlier. Sometimes we ask our funders to fund our partners first if they have to choose between us and them. And a lot of times we build them into our grants. And so if we're using their services, we will build them into the grants so that the funder can see that we are paying the people that we are, using them, the labor or using for collaboration. We're making sure that we're paying those organizations. And we also supply sub-grants as well to other organizations. So we really, again, are making sure that we're really community directed and that we're supporting other organizations. And I know that was a principle, right, of CCF is being mutually exclusive of other organizations. And we really try to do that and try and do it well.
I'm sorry. Just as a follow-up, when we were talking, there was something we also discussed, authentic storytelling. And we talked about how critical it is for the organization in terms of storytelling, but share with the folks who are listening in about authentic storytelling and the benefit in the fundraising and development area.
Yeah, so another thing, I think, another buzzword term that maybe you all have heard is poverty porn, right? Of, having these stories or, these blogs that are basically, think of the commercial with Sarah McLachlan singing and the dogs look really sad in the background, like those types of stories, right? And how maybe they'll pull on the heartstrings but they'll show the community in this like dark light, right? Of like, they need your help, you need to come in, swoop in and save them, right? That real savior complex. And so what we have been doing, and something that I have been really researching a lot too, is being more ethical in the storytelling. And so that means empowering our communities and really making sure that they're at the forefront of the stories that we're telling. And so for us, that means, looking at our annual appeals, looking at our e-blast that tells a story, and giving our community, our clients, really some skin in the game when it comes to creating those stories. And so one of the last appeals that we did, we actually, had a client asked, multiple times if she was okay sharing her story. And she wrote that story. She wrote that appeal herself, and we sent that out. And so in doing that, make sure that one, she's empowered to tell her story, but also that the story is told in an ethical way, that we're not saying that we swooped in and saved them, but they're saying how they use their own agency to save themselves. And I think that's really important too, because again, when you think about centering the community in fundraising and doing it equitably, you don't want to show the community as other. We're part of the community. And when you are telling a story in a way that centers, again, the community, right? This is what we're going to keep going back to. You're making sure that the donors, the funders feel a part of that community. And when we're all uplifted, when they're uplifted, everyone is uplifted. And so, stopping this, other, but again, showing us all as we're in this together. Again, that mutual exclusive support and making sure that people understand that. And so we're actually, in a couple of weeks, I think, doing an ethical storytelling training for our entire staff. So I'm looking forward to that because, like I said, I'm still doing a lot of work and research on what that means and kind of how to do it in a great way.
Thank you. Megan, did we have some other questions or any other questions from the folks who are listening in? Feel free.
Yeah, I don't see any questions right now, but I think let's give it a minute. If there's any questions that you have for either Cynthia or Nakia of what their experience has been in this change, or some of the processes that they've explained that they're using.
And I can totally fill the void. I can talk about this topic forever and ever. I think a lot of my old Voices colleagues know that. But I think one other thing that I said in the beginning, and I think bears again repeating, is that you can't really do this work without kind of having that map, that strategic plan, that overall vision for the whole organization. And so this really does resonate with different parts. Like I said, the fundraising, we're really trying to implement a lot more community-centered fundraising efforts. But a lot of our other programs are doing this as well. So again, within storytelling, not just in fundraising, but for our whole staff, but also our programs have been doing a lot of community lawyering as well. And so our attorneys and our organizers have been working together to go out into the communities. Right now we have a campaign called Our Rights Matter, and they go out to communities and kind of talk about what their rights are, when they are faced with a difficult situation. And I can drop that link for you all as well. But again, it kind of touches all the different pieces of our organization. It's not just in fundraising because we can't work in silos.
I think that's really important, and that will maybe lead you into this question that just popped into the chat of what advice you have on how to make the transition for organizations that are small and they don't have somebody dedicated to fundraising.
That's a great question. I think, again, if it's a small organization, I would kind of take a look again at what your values are and your mission is as an organization. And again, kind of make sure that you have an equity lens pointed to that. Another thing that I like to tell folks too is there's a model called 15% solutions, which I really like a lot because it focuses on the things that you can change yourself within your organization. And so I always tell people to start out small. I think, especially when you think about, the community-centric fundraising principles or any type of model, it seems overwhelming. But if you think about just the things that you can change within your organization, it kind of seems a little less daunting. And starting off really small sometimes will help you, right? You're not going to be able to do all this work in one go, especially since it's still evolving. We're all still learning. So I think just starting out with one thing, whether that be, if you don't have a dedicated fundraising staff, but you're doing, an appeal letter to your supporters, start with that and think about how to tell the story in a different way that, again, centers the community and then build up from there. So I think starting out small is the best way to go.
Thank you. One more question. Do you have a financial commitment requirement for your board members?
They do not. So that was another thing that we had talked about with, again, kind of being equitable, not just externally, but internally. And so again, as you all heard with our board makeup, we have about 24% community members and 24% that are eligible for our services. And again, we do legal aid for low-income communities. So it didn't feel right for us to have a minimum for our board members when we're asking community members who are eligible for our services, you know, to be on our board. So again, as Cynthia was talking about, we really do value time, talent, and treasure. And again, we really value lived experiences. And so having people that are going through, you know, that work in the community or live in the communities and really breathe in those communities are just as much valuable to us as someone who is going to, you know, write us a check, but then never be at a board meeting.
And we don't ask for a minimum donation either for our board members at Voices. I think you want to go to the last question you see, Meg?
Yeah, there's one more question of, are there any local groups of fundraisers working on community-centric fundraising within their organizations that someone could connect with? Thinking outside of the CCF Slack and online hub.
Great, yeah, I was gonna say the CCF Slack, but to be honest, I think we're all so busy that we actually don't post a lot. But yeah, so again, you know, I think that, you know, we're doing a lot of work at Legal Aid Justice Center, so you all can feel free to reach out to me. I also want to shout out Virginia Community Voice. And if you all were at the BAFRI webinar, and I can share that with you all too, because we actually have it posted publicly. But they are also doing community-centered fundraising, and they have basically created their own courageous fundraising principles, which is a spin on the CCF principle. So they're doing great work over there as well. And then Art 180 is doing some great work as well within this realm. And I'll have to reach out and see, you know, Nicole has done some talks as well, you know, across Richmond and Virginia. And again, I think she'd be happy to talk to other folks too. And I know that there are other organizations that are doing the work, but again, these are just the ones that I know of personally because I have these conversations with them. But there are so many organizations that are starting and trying to do this work.
All right. Any more questions? Nakia, thank you. This was awesome. It was my great pleasure to talk to you about all the work that you're doing and that you have done. Thank you all for participating. I know Megan was constantly dropping information in the chat, and then Nakia can gather some other information. We can still email the folks who are registered, correct, Megan? Yes. So any additional information that Nakia was just referring to, we can include. And I'm going to check the chat one more time. Oh, this is stuff that Nakia is dropping in. All right. Thank you all so much for participating today. Please look and see there are a couple of days left of Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week events. And so we would love to see you participate in some of those as well. And again, thank you, be safe, and take care.
Nakia, do you mind to answer one more question?
Oh, one more question, sorry.
Sorry, it came in, I just saw it. It says, do you have advice on recruiting community members to assist with fundraising? You spoke a lot about getting community members into your board. So what does that look like in terms of fundraising?
Yeah, I saw that. I was gonna chat to her, but yeah,
okay.
To answer out loud. Yeah, so I think, again, just look at what your mission is and then find people in the community that are doing that work. So for us, again, we have 4 different programs that we work across. And I think one of a key example for us is, you know, our work in our economic justice program and our housing. And so we looked for people that were organizing in the housing community, you know, in the Gilpin Court, in Creighton Court, that were doing this work on their own. People that have been in the news who, again, have been doing this work for long before, you know, we have come into their communities. So, you know, in looking at that, you know, we would talk with those folks and again, see if there was a mutual connection. And then we're able to, you know, really get them on board with our mission and get them onto our board. So I think that, again, finding people that are doing the work that's related to your mission is the easiest way to find people that want to be involved. And then speaking specifically with fundraising, for us, we kind of have a fundraising menu for folks to get involved. And so it's not just, asking people to give money or asking people to do X, Y, and Z. We have different ways for them to get involved, whether that's writing a thank you note to a donor or a funder, or making a phone call to one of those folks just to say thank you as well. Sometimes that could just be, inviting somebody else to one of our community events or our community programming. And so we make sure that there are different ways for them to get involved, because I also know fundraising is not for everybody, and asking people for money is not for everybody, and that's okay. And so again, figuring out where they're comfortable plugging in is useful too, because there's so many other things that they can help within fundraising, right? It's not just always about asking for money.
Yeah. I think it goes back and connects what Cynthia was saying about time, treasure, and talent. It's not just always about asking somebody for something, but how can you connect them to the larger mission as well?
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo a thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate your willingness to just share your experience and to give us some tools where we can all take back and work on this within our own organizations. As Cynthia said, there's still a few events left in the week. I'm going to drop the link one more time to the RTR Week page. This has an archive of events. So I know that people have asked about a recording. The recording will be available. It will not be immediately posted, but on that site, on that link, there will be archive of events, and this video will be posted to there as well. If you have any more questions, I did drop Nakia and Cynthia's email in the chat. As they said, you are welcome to reach out to them with any questions. I know this is something that they are both passionate about and look forward to sharing more with you all. So thank you for joining today, and we hope to see you at other events.